Zack Snyder's Justice League gave rise to an epic romance that broke every rule of the long-established universe of DC heroes. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. Zack Snyder's Justice League might be the only superhero film to be embroiled in endless controversy despite being one of the best cinematic expressions of creativity. The DC Extended Universe movie not only had drive but enough passion to deliver a gut punch through its complex retelling of familiar superheroes with their oversaturated origin stories. The filmmaker dared to turn the genre on its head and delve into an alternate universe where the lines of good and evil are a bit more blurry and morality is a bit more questionable. More so, Snyder showed his audience the grim dark reality of what happens when truth, justice, and the American way just don't work against corruption anymore. Heroes need to bend their honor and stoic laws of ethics and fight fire with fire to take the villains down. Zack Snyder's Superman did not die a graceful death. Instead, it was messy, brutal, and unworthy of such a valorous hero. In the aftermath of his passing, Bruce Wayne was brought back from his dark and vengeful path by Lois Lane, and a romance blossomed between the two. The foreshadowing of Lois' pregnancy in Justice League was the result of her relationship with Bruce. Ridden by guilt and the alien threat of Darkseid, Bruce traversed the highs and lows and far corners of the world to unite the heroes of the Justice League and resurrect Superman, leaving Lois, and never uttering a word about their time together. In the battle that followed in the unmade Justice League films, Batman failed to protect Lois, making Superman fall under Darkseid's influence and giving rise to the Nightmare timeline. To prevent such a fate, Flash travels back in time and warns Bruce about Lois being the key to winning the war. In the reoriented reality, Bruce dies to protect the woman he had come to love. In an interview with Vanity Fair, Snyder revealed the storyline so shocking that even the studio swerved their heads and collectively said no. The intention was that Bruce fell in love with Lois and then realized that the only way to save the world was to bring Superman back to life. So he had this insane conflict, because Lois, of course, was still in love with Superman. We had this beautiful speech where Bruce said to Alfred, "I never had a life outside the cave. I never imagined a world for me beyond this. But this woman makes me think that if I can get this group of gods together, then my job is done. I can quit. I can stop." And of course that doesn't work out for him. 20 years later, Clark and Lois bring Bruce Kent to Gotham, introducing him to the world that Batman left behind, as he takes in the mantle of the Dark Knight in a city that had gone on too long without its silent protector. Through his Justice League trilogy, Zack Snyder has achieved stratospheric levels of infamy and is either completely idolized or utterly hated by the fans and followers of DC. The filmmaker's vision for the DC universe had the potential to rival even Grant Morrison's works through its subtle mix of tragedy, battle-hardened heroes, and agenda-influenced corrupt realism. Yet, the DCU Justice League has minimal ties pertaining to its baser roots, i.e., truth and justice. The group of superheroes has endured the passing throes of time and responded to the ever-shifting changes not on the merit of its goodness but by how divisive Snyder's cut of the movie actually was. In the end, Zack Snyder's Justice League remains a classic of the modern era for questioning the accepted norms of superhero cinema and changing it radically, for better or worse. The film not only gave the fans an unfiltered and unsaturated view of the world, but also its heroes colored by the corrupt perceptions of the broken reality around them. For that, Snyder's Justice League will always hold a special place in the fandom's collective memory. Zack Snyder isn't wrong to adapt comic books with an R-rated lens of originality, but the fans just weren't ready for his vision for one comic book IP. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. There have been very few certifiable comic book nerds with an established career as a box office giant as Zack Snyder and Henry Cavill. Both are among the most celebrated, if not incredibly controversial, names on the top 5 list. Even so, Snyder achieved something that has evaded directors for decades, a cult-like following as equally devoted to his work as trolls and dissenters are on tearing him down. Despite the vitriolic mobs and Snyder cultists colonizing every corner of the comic book industry, the director has remained unapologetic about his love for heroes, villains, and the grim dark reality devoid of ethics and morality. It is this love of his that introduced him to the depraved world of Watchmen in his adolescence and that made him fit to adapt the comic as a Hollywood director. Alan Moore's Watchmen was a genius manifestation of all the elements that turn the world and the people living in it into an edgier, darker, and more honest iteration of their current selves. Embedded within the superhero narrative, Watchmen delivers a no-nonsense critique of pop culture and the obsession with the genre and challenges the reader's perception of morality. It's no wonder, then, that Zack Snyder felt more moved by the world of Watchmen than he did by the softcore genre presented by Marvel and DC. While speaking in an interview with Entertainment Weekly before the premiere of the film, Snyder revealed, "Watchmen is like the music you feel is written just for you. That's my song, no one else gets that but me. That's why the fanbase is so rabid, because they feel personal about it." The difference between Watchmen and a normal comic book is this. With Batman's Gotham City, you are transported to another world where that superhero makes sense. Watchmen almost superimposes its heroes on your world, which then changes how you view your world through its prism. That's the genius of this book. Although he succeeded in adapting the unfilmable comic book to the big screen, Zack Snyder's Watchmen remains one of the most divisive works of his career, perhaps even more so than his controversial Justice League movie. With a rating of 65% on Rotten Tomatoes, the film was deemed too dark, not coherent enough, an absolute masterpiece, or even ambitious and sublime. With a material as dark and swirling with metaphors as Moore's comic book miniseries, it was a surprise that Snyder's Watchmen managed to stay in the front lines rather than receding back into Warner Bros. Vaults. Despite releasing the film with apprehension and dampened expectations, Zack Snyder was taken aback by the amount of vitriol that accompanied his take on the beloved comic series. It took Warner Bros. 15 years to recover from the shock and release an animated film based on the same in 2024 that garnered 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. However, it is this very dissension that Zack Snyder wanted to reflect in his adaptation of Watchmen. The film was not meant to cater to the audience's pop culture obsession with watching noble heroes defeat evil villains. Rather, the director managed to merge satire with reality and present a critique of how superhero movies have affected pop culture. The movie is a challenge, like the book is a challenge, to your icons, your morality, how you perceive pop culture, how you perceive mythology, and for that matter, how you perceive God. It was absolutely genius that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons did all of that in the context of a superhero story. That was a revolution for a lot of people. You sit down to read something that's just a comic book, and then you're like, holy s, my mind got blown. While his love for the comic book remains unrivaled, Snyder also recognizes how Watchmen helps challenge the established norms and status quo of the comic industry, as well as the reality that people have grown because of his contributions to the comic industry. And although Watchmen did not find all the fans ready to accept its grim dark world with open arms, if you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell directed by Zack Snyder himself. Zack Snyder made a name for himself diving into controversial lores and subjects that made Hollywood more uncomfortable than they'd like to admit. The director who brought a 100-year-old legacy studio to its knees is worth paying attention to, and yet, Snyder's own legacy remains colored by his misjudged and underrated classics. With a portfolio that contains such visually artistic and revolutionary films as 300, Watchmen, Justice League Snyder's Cut, and Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder could command any studio to lend him a project of his choice. But his difficult past makes him a high-risk individual in this ostentatious and superficial industry. It's no wonder that Snyder's brilliance is often overshadowed by the dirty politics that help keep Hollywood relevant in the world of popular culture. With a nose for the visually and aesthetically dynamic, Zack Snyder has crafted one world after another that makes hardcore comic book fans go weak in their knees. His vision